So I'm gonna get the attention of everyone here. It's a pleasure to have Dr. Santiago Utsumi, originally from Argentina. So one of the conditions to him to come here was to accept that Brazil is better than Argentina in soccer. So that was the condition. Come here and accept that.
We'll see it in the next
World Cup in Brazil, but let's see. And then Santiago, is agronomist, graduated at University de Mar del Plata in Argentina. He got his agronomy degree there and also his master, and he got his PhD in New Mexico State, working with range and grazing ecology. So he will be sharing today here a lot of outstanding research, and he's an outstanding young scientist and working at Michigan State University at the Kellogg Biological Foundation Institute, and I'm very glad that we can, take advantage of his knowledge here today. So I'll let you get the leadership now.
Thank you, Andre. So thank you everyone for coming today, and particularly for those that have been involved in inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you today, and also was really good today morning to spend some time with all the farming crew and Andre and the students and discussing ideas together, right? Because this is all about, right? We need to try to learn as much as we can from nature and try to apply, right, that knowledge that we're going to adapt, right, to adapt to the change. So thank you again for the invitation. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is, the title of the presentation was a little bit vague right at the beginning, so I improve it, right? So the general idea is to go through general concepts on first giving you, to some of you that might not be very familiar on the US industry, what is the status today, what are the trends and the challenges that we as farmers face for the future, and then to link this context to the organization of our new project at Michigan State University on pasture-based dairies, with the interesting concept that we are trying to link pasture-based dairies with technologies, in this case automatic milking systems, AMS or robotic milking. And then I will go through more details on practical aspects of management, but at the same time by using some foundational research on mechanisms and processes related to plant-animal interactions, and also guide you on how we can use that information to frame new approaches, right, practical approaches to more sustainable grazing systems. And finally, I will briefly describe what is our current project design and what are the future directions that we are discussing or putting in place today that move forward to a more system-based approach to pasture-based dairies, with my emphasis on profit, labor, land use, environmental impacts, and within environmental impacts, more intensive research on greenhouse gases, nutrients, and carbon, right, footprint. So starting with this, so in this slide, what I want to share with you is how good work has been applied here in the US to really come up with systems that we can say they are efficient, right? The US was really good at, over time during the last decades, right, to start increasing the overall milk production across the states by increasing production per cow and at the same time decreasing the number of cows. We cannot blame, this is efficiency, right? But the problem is that this is just milk production efficiency. What happens with the systems that we've been using in the past? We've been intensifying so much these systems, doing changes in genetics, but at the same time in the way that we are impacting the way that we are managing cows, and through these changes in the way that we are impacting land. and we are impacting the environment. We move from what was originally the diverse, profitable, sustainable pasture-based dairy to more confined, intensive, large operation dairies. And through that, we've been changing the rules in land use, moving from diversified rotations to crop monocultures, right? And we know what happens, right, when we move into a low diverse, right, management system. So in related to those changes, also we have socio-economical aspects related to this. Farming is done by people, right? And those farmers impact the well-being of communities, right? So it's important to know what changes are around that dimension, at the same time the social dimensions, right, of farming here. And what we noticed through last decades was a massive shift from dairies to the east to the west, right? And related to this, at the same time, changes in the size of those farms. Those farms that relocate right to the west start building over, increasing in size, and at the same time, what was originally that diverse population of small, medium farmers start disappearing, right? That is important, right? Because it's about people. It's about the sustainability of a farming community. So that is a reason for why I say that today the US is entering in a new crossroad. In a new crossroad at the intersection of the economic, social, and environmental aspects, right, of agriculture. We are talking about dairy in particular here, but we can apply these concepts to other forms of agriculture, right? And for me, this is a nice red flag of attention for us as scientists, because we really need to focus in a more integrated approach to solutions to these problems. And this is why we do science. And we try to come up with some research programs that provide quick innovations to develop and deliver quick solutions to try to mitigate these issues. And this is all about my research at the Kellogg farm in Michigan State. It's a project where we are trying to put a multidisciplinary approach to really produce broad impact across dimensions, right, with the challenges associated there. Perhaps you cannot, apology if you cannot read it very well here, but it's about trying to tackle the current problematics related to environmental aspects of dairy farming, the economics and the social aspects of dairying, but not only in the context of what is happening today, but in anticipating the future challenges that most farmers are likely to face in the near future. And that is a reason for why I've been proposing a more integrated approach in combining some empiric theoretical work with some extension component and education, and linking, having relationships with partner farms, so we can spread the information that we have. It's not only about generating good information and papers, but trying to make those papers to work, right? So that is my project at KBS. It's a sustainable approach to provide solutions to farmers, right? So this is the Kellogg project, and this is the way that I like to define it. It's a research-driven project on pasture-based dairy systems addressing issues of profit, labor, land use, and environmental impacts. And I'm going to talk a little bit on the setup that we have today and some research that is going on. One of the interesting features that we are working with, as I said, is that we are including, it's not about, as many people claim, but someone complains that it seems that some people feel that we are taking a step into the past, going back again to low productive production systems. But I would say it's completely the opposite, what we are trying to do. It's not about, if we think in dairy systems just as production-driven, with production objectives, this is not all about. But what we are trying to do is to keep or increase productivity in the dairy system through efficiencies. And one of those key efficiencies is labor, is quality of life, and this is where the robotic milking fits, right? What is robotic milking? Is basically the combination of two key concepts. One is the voluntary milking, or the process by which cows choose when to be milked by their own within some ranges that are given by the settings of the system. And the second concept is the automation of that milking process, right? All of the steps of the milking of that cow are fully automated. So this is the farm today. What we have is, let's say, a milking platform area, right, where we have a central milking barn, where we have two robotic milkers there, and where we control, and also where we use some kind of automatic sorting gates related to the milking robots to control the flow of the cows, right, around the system, so we can reduce that labor intensity or step away from that flow or movement of the cows, right, to leave them in a free choice situation. So they are also going to start deciding whether or not to stay grazing, let's say, in these grazing strips, or go back to the barn by their own to be milked, right? And this is a nice challenge, right, because requires a lot of understanding of behavioral principles, how the animals react to the feeding environment, the different features that we have, the predictability of the allocation of the different resources, and we want to control all that voluntary concept, right? Voluntary milking concept within the context of managing efficient entire pasture-based systems, right? So that is a way where we have different lanes, right, to control the traffic of the cows within the system. And the challenge is, practical challenge is to organize a good, efficient, and productive pasture-based area in Michigan are simple, but clear. It's like we have a limited time, right, throughout the year to really do a good pasture utilization, right? And then we have 4 months, pretty much 4 months of the year where we can go to do some ice fishing, right? Because the pastures are not growing. But that is a challenge. And the challenge exists on how we can increase productivity and efficiency of milk production from grass throughout those 8-9 months of the year, right? Challenge is related to that forage utilization principle is, okay, what other elements and components we can start thinking about or changing within this system to try to increase efficiencies overall. And here in dairy we have a big discussion on what is a more ideal type of cow for different production systems. So on the right side you can see here a New Zealand Friesian cow, a very light cow, right, compared to larger and heavier Holstein cow, but with huge differences in milk yield and at the same time in components which are not here, right? More fat, more protein in these smaller cows. And the third challenge is, as I said, assembling these systems around the context of technologies so we can improve quality of life of the farmers and at the same time the efficiency across the system. The principles that we apply at the dairy are very simple and are basically the foundation of any pasture-based dairy. What we want is to try to maximize forage utilization, and there is no discussion on whether we want to do that, if it's per area or per cow or lactation. We need to maximize always that forage utilization and conversion, but the main goal is to not only utilize but convert, right, milk. So we can produce as much as possible milk from grass, and again, no discussion again, if we are maximizing individual cows or area, we need to focus on both at the same time. The grazing management here at the dairy relates also to keeping that continuous flow of cows through the system, and that requires some changes, right? If we compare to some, let's say, more traditional pasture-based areas using more parlor type milking systems. So that management needs to start with a good foundation of knowledge, right? And here is where I like to put a lot of emphasis. We need to start thinking in grazing beyond just being a practice of feeding cows. We need to know that grazing is a really spatially variable process that is also dynamic over time, and that through time and space, you know, we have the animals interacting with this environment at different levels, right, through shifts in behaviors. And those behaviors are going to have a huge impact on that consumption of grass by the cows, but at the same time on the impacts that the animals are going to leave on the plant community, right? We need to think in grazing as a feeding practice, but at the same time as a disturbance that we can control to manage plant community dynamics, the assembly of the plant communities, control invasibility, keep stability in the system, right? So that is a way I like to start talking about grazing, and we need to focus on that dynamics, right, through space and time, and really start thinking in mechanisms that might occur, right, at these different spatial scales, right? We can organize a grazing from single individual bites to all of the area that the cows can graze within an entire paddock or pasture, right? So I'm going to describe some key mechanisms that we need to consider when we are managing cows in pasture. And this is where we do, that is the reason for why we do research. So if we have a pasture, right, let's say this in this picture, right, that is a canopy of a pasture that by the picture is a mix, alfalfa and grass is there. How the cows are going to graze this pasture? Through horizons, and that is what I am trying to describe here, right? And we are going to have a deeper top horizon, which is going to be approximately 50% of that initial height of the pasture. If we force the cows to graze down, they are going to graze a next horizon there with shorter bites, and if we push more the cows, they are going to really put that pasture in a very short residual, but at the same time with dynamics and changes in that depletion, right, and bite mass change. And that is important from the point of view of the nutrition of the cows. As we increase that depletion rate, so moving through horizons, then we are going to see that key components, right, of that feed intake of the cow are going to start going down, right? And here is where we can start seeing that relationship between these functional responses, right, and the way that we are grazing those pastures, right? So the residual management here is not only related to just feeding cows, but also the residual at which we want to keep those pastures to ensure that we are having a good if area, right, index that remains there to intercept radiation and keep, right, those pastures growing as much as we can. Another evidence or mechanism that I really like to go through is illustrated, I think is very self-explicit. This is not just that dynamics in a vertical dimension of the pastures, but also in the horizontal dimensions, right? And again, this is a highly controlled experiment where what we've been testing is how does the cows respond to some changes in the spatial arrangement of those environments, right? If they are facing heterogeneous pastures where we have a plant community with different species, the likely there is that the species are going to aggregate into patches, right, over space, right? And those patches are going to be highly dynamic over time at the same time, depending on how that plant-animal interaction works. So what we've been trying to control here in these two treatments that I'm showing is how does the distance between, let's say, successive patches in a grazing path is influencing the responses at the local level, and how all of the information that the cow is gaining throughout a grazing sequence is producing some kind of feedbacks and learning on that cow to quickly adjust to those changes. So what we've been hoping is that this traveling effort is costly, is time, is energy, and because of this, the cows will need to always see what they have in front, right, to compensate and dilute that energy cost of foraging, right? And that is what happens. So that cow now is grazing this alfalfa patch, right? It's going to take pretty much all of the bites possible, and now she moves. And again, step by step, time, energy, effort, right? And what happens? Even though I dislike that grass, I will eat. Right? It's like that. Picking a cookie from a plate here or walking all the way through the other side of, right, the hole to choose just one cookie, right? If we go there, we are going to pick more than one, right? But here we can be more choosy, right? And pick the one that we really like. So that was a hypothesis here, right? So that cow eating, let's keep it there, keeping everything, and let's see what happens on this cow. So now what we are going to see here is the same patch size arrangement, but with a shorter distance, right there. So we have a patch of alfalfa, followed by here a patch of fescue in a close proximity. And what do you think that cow is going to do?
Just keep you on top.
And leave the grass, right? Okay, who agrees with that? I also agree with that, but who also agrees that it's going to take some sampling, reinforcement, testing of what is going on in that foraging sequence to start reacting to that. I do that, say that also. So she now is biting right here, almost all of the bites possible from that alfalfa. She knows about the sequence, she was testing there the fescue, now she can see here a next patch in the sequence, it's alfalfa. Well, it's close, it's distance, I can be picky, right? So if we go to the pastures and pay attention, we can see these mechanisms going on there with the cows. Even though in those pastures where we think are pretty much homogeneous, right? These processes are really happening, right? And this is a way that herbivores, right, have the potential to structure those plant communities. In the way that we manage these animals, is the option that we have to structure those plant communities in the way that we think are the correct way to keep a good function of those ecosystems, right? That is grazing management for me. Okay, so let's keep moving. Okay, so if we scale up those responses, we can move further and start thinking in more long term, right? On the behavior of these grazing cows. And I would like to highlight that with a simple study that we did with a couple of students 2 years ago in trying to establish some linkages on the capacity of the animals to generate some reference memory on the pastures or the distribution of, let's say, plant species or patches within a pasture, the selectivity of those cows, and the foraging efficiency with which those cows are grazing, right? Foraging efficiency is basically, we can define that as the amount of feed that they consume per step that they walk or per time, right, that they are searching in those patches. So what we've been working is in two treatments. One that is unpredictable and the other one that is an unpredictable scenario. The unpredictable means that over space and time we've been changing the location of preferred feed, pellets or supplement there. The predictable scenario, what we did is to keep consistency over space and time, the location of that preferred feed. So we are allowing those animals to develop some reference memory on where and when that feed is located, right? So who is who? Can you see the green lines? Those are the patterns, right, of the cows foraging in those pastures, right? In the right, I'm showing you that predictable environment where the cows are moving pretty much in a straight line from locations where they have the preferred feed. The preferred feed is the red buckets there. On the left side, can you see all these pattern and tortuosity and pretty much covering the entire area? These cows were trying to search and find where the feed that they really like was located, right? And in doing so, they explored the entire pasture. In grazing management, in some places, we may want to apply this. in others, we may want to apply that. Who agrees with that? In some places, we want to target some areas in a pasture. In some places, we want to keep more uniformity and even defoliation throughout pastures, right? In dairy production systems, as in the system that I'm working, where we want to control that cow movement and flow throughout the system, so we have the cows visiting by their own from the pastures to the milking unit, then we might want to generate some expectation and make them search more and move more through the system, right? I don't know. We are testing that in a study right now, but we need to think in mechanisms, right, to make decisions. So those principles in knowing better the functioning, let's say, of plant-animal interactions, also in practical terms are also going to apply for understanding defoliation and the responses of plant to those defoliation impacts, right? So throughout the last years, what we've been doing with my students is to start generating some growth functions and understanding the dynamics of growth at the tiller level or at the plant level, and how changes in biomass, right, are related to changes in those growth rates. And at the same time, in introducing some technology so we can quickly generate some references or for farmers so they can know, what could be their potential targets for grazing, let's say the pre-grazing biomass in our rotational grazing and residuals, if their main goal is to keep high growth rate in the season. So by the end of the season, they are maximizing that utilization of grass per unit of area, right? We had a really nice conversation with the farm crew and students this morning on this, and this is I would say, the number one principle, right, in grazing management. So the tools that I'm using here, that we are using here, these are rapid plate meter that has some laser sensors there and a built-in GPS. So you can drive with the ATV throughout all of the farm, right, in, let's say, 4 hours, and by the end of those 4 hours, you have the cover of all of the paddocks there. And you can organize them, right, in this way from those that are pretty much ready to be grazed to residuals. But we want to control those values, right? And that is a reason for why it's very important to not only understand just the responses to some existing biomass or residuals, but to also to try to manage those allocations based on the growth of those pastures, right? In this figure, this is a synthesis of, let's say, one season, the first year that we've been working there, and this is the environment that we are dealing with, right? Plant communities that have a sharp change in growth rates throughout the year. Growth rate is the line. The green bars, the red bars are related to the grazing days per month, right? That the cows been grazing these pastures, and this cumulative line is related to the total forage utilization that we've been applying in that farm, right? How this compares to a hay field. Who says we can produce more by doing hay? What is the difference between a grazing system and a hay field? How many rotations we are cutting, or how many rotations we have in a hay field? How many times we are cutting through the year? 2, 3. In a grazing system, here, like this one, we've been grazing about 8 to 12 times. And keeping those pastures always within those targets of the linear phase of growth, right? So that is why the information is important. And for us, we know up front, let's say in our systems, we are working with stocking rates that are equivalent between 1 cow acre and 1.5 cow acre. And we know up front how much growth per day we need to know to feed those cows, right? So for us, for those stocking rates, we need a growth of about 35 pounds a day to keep even that system in balance, right? So growth is equal to the needs of the cows. But then we start having deviations from that. We know that we need 35, but in spring, growth goes high. So what we need to do? start capitalizing that excess of growth. If we keep going in grazing in all this rotation, what we are going to do is to start grazing more mature and more mature pastures, reducing quality, reducing intake, and suppressing growth. So it's more smart to predict up front what is the deviation right from that growth that you need, and start, for example, closing the same proportion of paddocks just for hay. The opposite is true on the other side of the season, when the growth is not sufficient to feed those cows. These are nice leafy pasture right in the fall. You can see the colors of the trees there, but there is an environmental constraint to that growth. We don't have the temperatures, and we cannot ask the pastures more than what the soil plant ecosystem is able to produce. So in this situation, we need to apply some subsidies. We need to supplement that deficit. I told you that we need about 35 pounds per acre day of growth to feed our cows. Well, we have there a 10-pound deficit per hectare. Well, we need per acre, sorry, we need to feed that, right? Otherwise, we are going to pushing down residuals. We are slowing growth, right? Because we are moving the growth function to the left side, right? A very low slope of growth. Also related to that supplementation is that what we know is we want to do is not only to just supplement those deficits to feed, to cover that deficit, but at the same time to supplement something that is not going to have to affect the way in which the rumen of these cows is digesting, right, that grass and converting that fiber into energy to produce milk, right? So in a study that we did last year, we've been comparing two stocking rate systems. So in a high stocking rate system, HSR, we've been forced to supplement more those cows with some forage-based supplement, right? And was 60% forage, 40% concentrate to supplement that deficit in growth. But in the way that we've been feeding that dynamically and just adjusting the amount just to the amount that to cover that deficit in the growth of the pastures, we also been able not only to prevent reductions in forage utilization, but also in the degradation rates, right, of the pasture in the rumen of those cows. So this is a picture on how, for example, an orchard grass alfalfa pasture pre-grazing condition looks like. At our farm, that is a 2,400 pound acre of dry matter, and the residual, we don't want to go less than these values, right? The ryegrass works in a different way because it has a different structure, and we are having a more presence here of a clonal plant, right? So the growth pattern is a little bit different, but we can also find those targets within which we can keep that plant community within nearly the linear phase of growth, right? Okay, so we want to manage grazing, but at the same time link that to the new concept of voluntary milkings. And here I am presenting you the first preliminary results when we start pasturing cows and milking them with these robots. In these figures, what I show here in this axis is the hours that we've been allowing those cows to access the pasture, and this was under the control of those automatic sorting gates and the milk response and voluntary milkings. And absolutely, as we increase time, right, the grazing time of these cows on pasture, we are going to challenge that free time that the cows have, right, to voluntarily visit back to the milking robot, and that is the reason for why milking frequency is going down, and then following that decline, the milk yield also is following down. But there are very important dynamics going on between the voluntary visitations with robot, the pasture, let's say, layout, the distances that the cows need to travel, right, back and forth between the barn and the pastures, and how those interactions impact to the milk production of these cows in this voluntary milking season. So here, what I'm showing you is apology, is perhaps a lot of information here, but it's a path analysis on the relationships between an environmental factor here, the distance that the cows need to walk to a pasture, the time that the cows spend grazing on the pastures once they leave that milking barn, the frequency with which those cows are transitioning back and forth between that pasture and the milking robot, the impacts that those changes in foraging grazing behavior are having on the milking frequency of those cows and then milking frequency on milk production. What I want to illustrate here is that grazing behavior is really plastic, and there is just a compensation between the time that the cows spend grazing in a single visit to a pasture and the frequency with which these cows are visiting that pasture. And these changes are having a strong impact on the milking frequency, right, of those cows with the robots. On one side, the longer they stay on the pasture, the lower the milking frequency, right, of these cows with the robots. On the other side, the more frequent and more enthusiastic these cows are to going back and forth between the barn and the robot, then the higher the milking frequency. But it's interesting to know that the direct effect of the distance to pasture to that voluntary milking frequency was not significant. It's not just about walking a long distance, it's just about what those cows do after they walk that distance. And this is great for me because it's showing plasticity in behavior and opportunities to manipulate those behaviors in order to accomplish some production goals, right? Absolutely, we are recently starting to understand these relations, but hopefully, we will come up with more, let's say, we can support more this information with more research and translate this information into practices for farmers. So going to a more system-based organization of this dairy, what I'm going to show you is just some responses on automatic milking systems throughout the year. Remember that in Michigan we can graze only 8 to 9 months, and then we need to confine those cows in the winter, right? So during the winter, basically we are feeding TMR inside the barn, and then during periods of transition, right, during that grazing season. But interesting is, on average, throughout the year, and this was the first year of grazing, remember that we've been moving TMR confinement cows to a pasture-based. That is not an easy task, and cannot just open the doors and leave the cows to do whatever they want. But in a first year, this is just to give you a summary on how that system looks like. And that system is about 2 tons of concentrate of those cows, 1 ton of forage that is through supplement, silage, and then each cow is consuming about 3 tons of pasture, right? And that represents about the 50% in that year. Now we move that dairy farm into a system-based research of 2 contrasting farming systems, and the numbers of percent pasture in the diet of those cows throughout the year now is 65 and 55%, right? The responses on the robots, right, to different feeding systems is also very interesting, because that means that we need to apply different approaches if we want to really do a good job with the management of the robotic milkers. Hopefully you can see the numbers here, but here between the two black boxes and the blue one, I am analyzing or modeling the relationship between the amount of supplement or reward that these cows are receiving in the milking robot, the milking frequency, voluntary milking frequency of those cows in the robot, and the milk yield. And for 3 feeding systems that I've been describing recently, the TMR in the winter, the partial TMR system within the transition between the TMR in winter and the pasture, and then the pasture. So we can describe these 3 systems as high energy, mid energy, low energy. The interesting note here is let's focus on this response, the milking frequency effects on milk yield. As we move from high energy to low energy, we can see that the response in milk yield due to increases in milking frequency starts declining. And why is that? Because the first factor affecting milk production in these cows is going to be energy intake. If cows are eating a high level of energy, then it's worth to milk them more frequently, because you are going to have that response, right? in milk yield due to milking frequency of energy is lower, then the response to milking frequency is going to be lower. From the perspective of an entire farm, an entire season, what this means? This means that to optimize that robotic milking, then in systems with high energy, we might need fewer cows, milking them more frequently. Or in systems with lower energy, like the pasture-based, we will need to increase number of cows, right, to compensate that decrease in milk yield due to low response in milking frequency. There is no fixed rule on how we need to manage, right, these robots. So I'm running out of time, but related to that research on the responses to the robots and the milk production responses, we also start working in new ways to start quantifying methane emissions from these cows across different feeding systems, but with more emphasis on pasture-based areas. So we teamed with a group of computer scientists and engineers from South Dakota, and we worked together for about 2 years in trying to come up with a system that allow us to measure the fluxes of methane from each cow in our farm in a non-invasive way. And this, what we've been doing is just working with some non-dispersive infrared sensors in a system where we can control air flows, and also using some gas tracers there to sample and analyze the air that is coming from the respiration and the air rotation of those cows. So today we have a good system, reliable system, where we can quantify the methane emissions of each of our cows that we have, the methane emissions in response to the different feeding practices, pasture grazing practices that we have, right? And the footprint, how much methane per unit of milk or solids of milk we are producing in the system. So just to show you differences in patterns, here are the 3 feeding systems that we've been discussing today: the confinement TMR, the transition, and the PTMR. And look at the change in the shapes of these patterns. And basically what they are reflecting are those changes in the feeding, right, pattern of those cows. The system that we are working is basically mechanistic, but what we basically do is to measure, let's say, the area, right, and methane for each eructation event of these cows, right? And then we integrate all of the area right under this curve and then start calculating those fluxes. And in this way we can start quantifying how well we are doing with the footprint across different feeding systems. So we have the TMR, the transition PTMR there, and the pasture concentrate. In the y-axis is the milk production, the methane flux per unit of milk production, and the milk. What we can see, regardless of the feeding system, is the same shape response. Increasing milk production is going to decrease the footprint of milk. And that is a good argument for, let's say, the confinement there is insane. Let's go and keep pumping high production right per cow. But the interesting is that that shape remains regardless of the production system, right? And for me, very interesting, and we are spending more time right now on this, it seems that there is a limit value here in between 27–30%, where further increases, right, in milk production are not really translating, right, decreases in the footprint per unit of milk. I guess that is because this increase in milk with these cows is through a high capacity of consumption and not feed conversion efficiency, right? So high variation from cow to cow. And the last thing that I would like to share with you is our current direction on more system-based approach. What we did is to split the farm in 2 sites, and what we are applying is 2 contrasting farming systems, one that is a high input system, the other one is a low input system. The high input system is a really high stocking rate system, which is about 1.5 cow per acre, The low stocking rate system is about 1 cow per acre. As we've been discussing today, this system is going to receive more external inputs and feeds. We can see that as more nutrients coming into the system, or perhaps compensating the nutrients that are going out right through milk. And this system is more conservative, I would say a very conservative pasture-based dairy for the region. At the same time, we are crossing those intensity treatments with different plant communities. In the two systems, we are working with a high diverse plant community, 6 species, and the idea is to keep growing in the number. And then the other is a simple ryegrass clover plant community, so 2 species and 2 functional groups. But the concept is this one, and perhaps this should be my first slide, and I apologize for not putting this one as the opening slide, because it's all about managing ecosystems. And managing ecosystems in a way that the interaction between the components of this system makes sense, that they are functioning in the same direction, so we can work on, providing ecosystem services and also on the regulating ecosystem services. And this is the direction that we are taking right in that system-based approach, in understanding better the flow of water, nutrients, carbon, gases right in these systems. So we start working with a more intensive sampling of carbon in the soil moisture, greenhouse gases, interacting also with other practices such as irrigation and developing good reference information for farmers on water use efficiency and targets for irrigation at the same time. My personal hypothesis in this system is as follows. And this is a typical grazing model right back from the 50s, where we used to plot the grazing pressure to productivity, and we have the production per individual cow and per area. So as we increase stocking rate and pressure in the system, we are reducing productivity per animal but increasing up to a maximum the production per area. And this is what we focus right in pasture-based areas. But how about challenging these theoretical principles of management with more new ideas on environmental footprint and impacts? My hypothesis is that as we increase this grazing pressure, then we are going to start increasing, like in a sigmoidal shape response, the ecological risk of these systems. And because of that, we should expect some scale responses, for example, in the global warming potential of these systems. If we define global warming potential as the difference between net emissions, right, and sequestration in the system. But what is the implication for this? This is a nice hypothesis, but the point is, what is the useful information from this? Because if this is true, then we can start designing systems that are more appropriate, not only in maximizing, but I would say optimizing productivity per area, but at the same time, in increasing the mitigation capacity of those systems. So this area for me represents the mitigation, the distance between this blue line and the red, mitigation capacity per head in systems of very low pressure but very low productive, right? But I would say we need to think in this response. If we have a scale response of GWP to pressure here, then perhaps the maximum mitigation capacity of the system is not at peak production, it's perhaps at lower. And that is what I'm trying to test, and hopefully we can work together to expand the gradient, right, of pressure to test this hypothesis. I'm going to finish here.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, we can take a couple of questions, and there's pizza in the other room there.
For casual, with opportunity for more casual interactions.
Yeah. Could you comment on the idea of changing animal food preferences in the direction of native weeds, invasives, and so forth, so as to boost the nutritional value to the animal from those? And one other question, are you doing anything in winter grazing from the point of view of getting the animals out on the pasture to spread the manure and so on?
Yeah, good points. The first question goes back to mitigation. Manipulating feeding preferences and feeding patterns, try to control invasive species, basically, with small ruminants. I would say there is a great room of opportunities, right, in doing that. I would say that we are recently starting to understand what are the interactions in general. The weeds or invasive plants are invasive or less palatable or less preferred for some reasons. And one of the more important reasons, because I believe in plant defense theory, is because instead of investing in growth, they invest in defense. And many invasive plants are high in plant secondary compounds, right? Many of those could be toxic, absolutely. So what we need to really understand better is the relationship between nutrients, toxins, and how those interactions are shifting feeding patterns, right? So for example, in studies where I've been trying to suppress species high in terpenes was by dosing and increasing protein. Because protein is the #1 nutrient, right? For detoxification of many of the target terpenes that we've been working with, right? And it's amazing because the cost of detoxification in terms of nitrogen for those terpenes could go up to an increase of 20–30%. And you can see the response is to protein supplement and then eating more of the toxic plant, right? And nothing happens. Because what you are really doing is building up the capacity of the animals to detoxify and deal with those toxins, right? So I would say the room is great. We need to learn more about. We need to start thinking in the ways that we can manipulate those feeding patterns. Supplementation was one. Another way that I've been working was in testing ideas of multi-species grazing, mixing more browsy animals, browsers like goats, with let's say more strict grazers like the sheep, so we can take more advantage of the versatile and more flexible feeding pattern of the goats, right? So basically putting pressure on herbaceous and palatable plants with the sheep and then forcing the goats to do more browsy use. Absolutely. And I would say that one of the best tools to manage vegetation is the herbivores. Right? They know more than us, I would say. Yeah. Yeah.
You talked about methane and enteric emissions from cows.
Yeah.
And I took away from your slides that cows that are in a total mixed ration are producing less methane than cows on a pasture-based diet.
Pretty much the same.
Well, yeah.
The methane per unit of milk is lower in the TMR compared to the pasture.
Okay. So my question is, in a TMR, presumably some of that feed has been fermented and has produced methane at some point before it got to the
in
cow.
the silo. Yeah.
So how do you, if you're thinking about the whole global warming potential of the system, how do you account for something like that?
Yeah, well, great point. First of all, my emphasis goes first to the pasture-based component, and there is where we set the boundaries. I would say, hopefully in the future we can address that and do a more integrated cycle analysis on that. But by the moment, I want to keep it, the goal is to have a good foundation of information of the pasture base and then keep going higher. We are not measuring right now the emissions from the silos, right, the bunkers, but absolutely that is a point source, right, of methane, absolutely, yeah. But related to that, I stop there, but I want to share with you, I would say, grazing can create a point source, right? We classify grazing or the emissions from pasture as a non-point, right, source, but the distribution of nutrients, right, and the impacts that are going on here are really focal and localized, right, and in interaction with the drivers, right, the temperature, moisture through the years, right, and depending on that soil microbial community, then the fluxes are going to be dramatic in some cases, right? So in this figure on the top, this in the fall, low temperature, right? So we should expect lower fluxes, right? But in this figure, I'm showing you the methane flux grams hectare day over time. So from 0 to 30 days after grazing for 3 patch types. The graze-only patch, the patches with graze but also that receive manure from the cows, and then the graze patches with urine, like this type of picture there. So the fluxes of methane, right, are just related to you know, the manure patches in early, let's say, days after following that deposition. The N2O, right, is more related to the nitrogen going back, right, through the urine, so that nutrient load, and the peak is more delayed over time because it takes time for that nitrogen, right, to go to denitrification depending on environment there, right. But just with this, we have a lot to learn, I would say. But yeah, I agree with you absolutely. Yeah, in your point.
Good. Well, thank you, Santiago.
And yes, we can adjourn next door.